Most people sense something is wrong in America, but few grasp how quickly events are accelerating. History teaches that civilizations rarely fall with a single blow. They erode quietly until the collapse feels sudden. Today we see warnings everywhere: debt spiraling out of control, borders left undefended, institutions weaponized, and a culture that has forgotten its own past. These are not isolated issues, they are signs of a storm already gathering. The question is whether Americans will recognize the danger in time, or whether the nation will drift unaware into a future it no longer controls. Number one, the calm before the storm. Every society approaching a turning point often moves forward as if nothing is about to change. People continue with their daily routines, investing their hopes in stability, while beneath the surface great shifts are already underway. America today shows the signs of this quiet unease. Rising inflation, cultural fragmentation, and political hostility are treated as temporary setbacks, rather than signals of deeper decay. It is precisely this atmosphere of normalcy that makes the moment so deceptive. The storm gathers strength quietly, and when it finally breaks, many will say they never saw it coming. The danger lies not simply in what is happening, but in how unprepared the public is to face the consequences. Throughout history, societies have lulled themselves into believing decline was someone else's problem, a distant event that could be ignored. By the time the Roman Republic sensed its collapse, the institutions that might have saved it were already too weak. America today risks repeating that same pattern, as warnings about fiscal irresponsibility, porous borders, and declining civic life are brushed aside as exaggerated or partisan. Such denial only magnifies the eventual shock. What follows from this complacency is a cycle of surprise and resentment. When crises erupt, economic turmoil, foreign aggression, cultural breakdown, citizens demand answers that leaders cannot provide. They ask how it all happened so quickly, never realizing the groundwork was laid years earlier. The calm before the storm is never truly calm. It is filled with subtle tremors that only the attentive notice. Recognizing those signals requires courage to confront unpleasant truths. Without that awareness, the nation walks blindly into challenges for which it is neither politically nor culturally prepared, setting the stage for upheaval few are ready to endure. Number two, the erosion of civic trust. Nations endure not simply because of their laws or their armies, but because citizens believe their institutions deserve respect. When that belief is lost, the entire civic framework begins to wobble. In America today, surveys reveal a profound collapse of confidence in almost every major institution. The press is seen less as a watchdog and more as a partisan instrument. Universities, once centers of inquiry, are often perceived as ideological factories. Even elections, the cornerstone of democracy, are increasingly doubted by significant segments of the population. When suspicion replaces respect, a republic begins to unravel. This erosion has consequences far beyond polling numbers. Without faith in fairness, ordinary citizens disengage, convinced their voices no longer matter. That vacuum is quickly filled by demagogues who thrive on distrust, offering themselves as the only alternative to a corrupt establishment. History is filled with examples. The collapse of Weimar Germany's legitimacy opened a door to extremism, while the cynicism of late Roman citizens weakened the bonds of loyalty that held the empire together. America now stands at a similar crossroads, with deep polarization feeding on institutional weakness. Each scandal, each abuse of power accelerates the cycle of disbelief. The tragedy is that trust, once squandered, is difficult to rebuild. Citizens may forgive mistakes, but they rarely forget deliberate deception or manipulation. Leaders who exploit institutions for short-term advantage leave behind long-term scars that weaken the republic. If people cease to believe in equal justice, honest reporting, or fair elections, they begin to withdraw their allegiance from the very system itself. What replaces that void is not stability, but chaos. The erosion of civic trust is more than an abstract concept. It is the silent dismantling of the American foundation, brick by brick, right before our eyes. Number 3, the weaponization of law and order. The health of a republic depends on the equal application of its laws. When citizens believe justice is blind, they accept outcomes even when they disagree. Yet once laws are bent to serve political ends, confidence in fairness collapses. America now confronts a dangerous moment where investigations, prosecutions, and even basic enforcement appear to follow partisan lines. High-profile cases are pursued with intensity when they target opponents, while similar offenses by allies are downplayed or ignored. Such selective application does more than anger individuals. It corrodes the entire foundation of civic life. History provides grim reminders of what happens when legal systems transform into weapons. In Athens during its decline, political rivals used the courts to settle personal vendettas, undermining the city's unity. The Roman Empire often punished dissenters harshly while shielding favored elites from accountability, breeding resentment that hastened its fall. Once citizens perceived that laws exist only to protect the powerful and punish the inconvenient, the idea of shared citizenship evaporates. People retreat into factionalism where loyalty to party outweighs loyalty to the rule of law itself. America is already seeing early signs of this unraveling. The long-term consequences are profound. When ordinary citizens no longer trust legal outcomes, they may cease to obey laws altogether, believing compliance is for the naive. At the same time, those in power grow emboldened, convinced that the system will always shield them. This cycle of cynicism and abuse can fracture a nation from within more quickly than any foreign enemy could. To preserve liberty, justice must not only be done, but must be seen as impartial. Without restoring confidence in law and order, America risks sliding into a state where legal battles replace democratic debate and coercion replaces consensus. Number 4, economic realities no one wants to face. Every generation inherits both the achievements and the debts of the one before it. America's prosperity has long rested on the promise that growth and innovation would outpace the burdens of borrowing. Yet the numbers tell a different story. The national debt now exceeds the size of the entire economy, and annual deficits show no sign of shrinking. Inflation erodes savings, while ordinary citizens struggle with rising costs for food, housing, and energy. The public is reassured that these trends are manageable, but beneath the surface lies a fiscal structure stretched far beyond its limits. Empires throughout history reveal the dangers of ignoring economic reality. Athens drained its coffers on endless wars, while Rome bankrupted itself through welfare expansion and military overstretch. In each case, citizens assumed the wealth of yesterday would sustain the promises of tomorrow, only to discover that creditors eventually demand payment. America risks following that same trajectory. Printing money and borrowing indefinitely can delay collapse, but it cannot erase fundamental arithmetic. A society that spends more than it produces eventually confronts scarcity, whether through inflation, taxation, or reduced global confidence in its currency. The danger is not only financial but cultural. When citizens live under constant debt, they grow accustomed to short-term thinking. Sacrifice, savings, and prudence give way to entitlement and consumption. Leaders mirror that mindset, offering immediate benefits without regard for the bill that follows. This cycle of denial and indulgence creates a fragile economy where even small disruptions can trigger crisis. Recognizing the peril is the first step toward reform, yet the national conversation avoids the subject, preferring comforting illusions. The storm of debt builds quietly, and when it finally breaks, many will wonder why they ignored the warnings that were always in plain sight. Number 5, borders, sovereignty, and the vanishing nation-state. A nation without borders is little more than a geographic expression. For centuries, America defined itself not only by ideals, but also by the boundaries that separated citizen from non-citizen. Today, those boundaries are increasingly porous, and the consequences reach far beyond immigration policy. Millions enter the country illegally each year, straining public services, reshaping demographics, and altering the political balance. Leaders present this as an act of compassion, but unchecked migration undermines the very principle of sovereignty. A republic cannot endure if it lacks control over who enters, who stays, and who belongs. History offers sobering parallels. The fall of Rome was hastened not simply by external invasions, but by the empire's inability to regulate its frontiers. Vast populations crossed into Roman territory, overwhelming institutions and transforming the cultural fabric. What began as small exceptions soon became an unstoppable tide. America faces a similar dilemma. Border security has become entangled in ideological battles rather than recognized as a fundamental duty of the state. When political elites treat enforcement as optional, they signal that national identity itself is negotiable. This accelerates division and weakens the bonds of shared citizenship. The erosion of borders carries long-term costs that extend beyond economics. Language, law, and tradition are diluted when integration fails, leaving communities fragmented and divided. Those who followed legal pathways feel betrayed, while citizens watch resources diverted from their own needs. At the same time, criminal networks exploit the chaos, trafficking drugs and people across poorly defended frontiers. Sovereignty is not an abstract principle. It is the very foundation of self-government. Without it, a nation loses the authority to shape its destiny. If America continues down this path, it risks becoming a territory rather than a republic, drifting without anchor or identity. Number 6, cultural amnesia and the rewriting of history. A society that severs itself from its past loses the compass that guides its future. In America today, there is a growing movement to reinterpret, erase, or vilify the nation's history. Statues are toppled, textbooks rewritten, and foundational figures recast solely through the lens of modern grievance. While no nation's past is free from flaws, the wholesale rejection of heritage creates cultural amnesia. Citizens no longer inherit a shared story, but instead absorb a narrative of perpetual shame. Without continuity, patriotism withers, and younger generations are left with little reason to defend or preserve what they no longer value. History provides countless lessons about the dangers of forgetting. Revolutions often begin by erasing memory, destroying monuments, and silencing traditions. The French Revolution sought to erase centuries of identity by reinventing even the calendar, only to descend into chaos and tyranny. Similar impulses are visible in modern America, where ideological zeal outweighs historical nuance. To deny both the failures and the triumphs of the past is to strip a people of resilience. The very freedoms that allow critics to speak exist because earlier generations sacrificed to preserve them. Yet that connection is being deliberately severed. Cultural amnesia also leaves a nation vulnerable to manipulation. A people ignorant of their history can be convinced of almost anything, because they lack the knowledge to challenge distorted claims. Civic unity requires more than shared laws. It requires shared memory. If the stories of Washington, Lincoln, or the Civil Rights Movement are reduced to caricatures, the common thread binding diverse communities unravels. Preserving history is not about glorifying every detail, but about acknowledging complexity and learning from it. Without that anchor, America risks becoming a nation adrift, unable to define who it is or why it endures. Number 7, global threats in a leaderless world. When a great power turns inward and projects uncertainty abroad, adversaries do not wait politely for it to recover. They advance, probing for weakness, exploiting hesitation, and filling vacuums of authority. America today finds itself in precisely such a position. Preoccupied with internal strife, partisan conflict, and cultural division, it has retreated from the confident leadership that once defined the post-war era. The world noticed rivals such as China, Russia, and Iran grow more aggressive, not because they are inherently stronger, but because they sense America no longer has the will to respond decisively. History demonstrates that deterrence collapses the moment strength is doubted. The fall of Athens after the Peloponnesian War, or Britain's decline after World War II, reveals how quickly influence can fade once perception shifts. America's withdrawal from Afghanistan signaled not merely a tactical decision, but a symbolic retreat. Beijing interprets it as a green light for expansion in the Pacific. Moscow reads hesitation as an opportunity to redraw borders in Europe. Tehran escalates proxy wars across the Middle East, calculating that American responses will be delayed, divided, or purely rhetorical. Each step emboldens further aggression, making future conflict more likely rather than less. The danger is compounded by a lack of strategic clarity at home. Citizens weary of foreign entanglements demand restraint, while leaders fail to articulate why global engagement matters to national security. Yet history teaches that isolation rarely prevents war. It merely postpones it until the stakes are higher. A leaderless America invites instability, and instability abroad eventually reaches its shores. The threats are not distant. They appear in disrupted trade, cyber attacks, energy shocks, and military challenges. Without renewed resolve and coherent strategy, America risks watching its influence erode, leaving a world increasingly shaped by hostile powers. Number 8, the fracturing of the American family and community. The strength of any republic is measured not only by its armies or its wealth, but by the health of its families and communities. For generations, the American family served as the primary institution of stability, passing on values of discipline, responsibility, and faith. Today, those foundations are eroding. Marriage rates have plummeted, birth rates decline, and vast numbers of children grow up without two parents in the home. At the same time, traditional community anchors, churches, civic groups, and neighborhood associations struggle to survive. What emerges is an atomized society where isolation replaces solidarity. History repeatedly shows that when the family weakens, the state grows stronger in ways that rarely benefit citizens. In Rome's later years, as family cohesion dissolved, the empire increasingly relied on bread and circuses to pacify a disengaged populace. Something similar is visible in modern America, where government programs attempt to replace the nurturing role once played by family and local institutions. This shift produces dependency rather than resilience, as individuals look upward to distant bureaucracies instead of outward to their neighbors. The decline of these small-scale loyalties makes the nation brittle, because a republic cannot survive without citizens first bound to each other. The cultural consequences are equally severe. A generation raised without stable homes or civic guidance often struggles with identity, purpose, and discipline. Communities once united by shared rituals and traditions now fracture into smaller tribes defined by ideology, grievance, or digital echo chambers. The erosion of face-to-face connection leaves people vulnerable to radicalization and despair. If America wishes to endure, renewal must begin at the base, not the top. Restoring families, rebuilding communities, and reviving civic habits are not optional luxuries. They are the very conditions of national survival. Without them, the republic's decline becomes irreversible. Number 9, lessons from history's collapsing empires. History is a stern teacher, offering countless warnings about what happens when nations squander their inheritance. The Roman Empire, for centuries the pinnacle of civilization, collapsed not only from external invasions but from internal decay, overspending, political corruption, and moral exhaustion. Athens, once a beacon of democracy, destroyed itself through reckless wars and factionalism. Even modern states, like Weimar Germany, demonstrate how rapid decline follows when institutions falter and citizens lose faith in their leaders. Each case reveals the same pattern. Great powers rarely fall in a single dramatic blow, but rather unravel gradually until collapse appears sudden. America today mirrors many of these symptoms. An expanding bureaucracy consumes wealth without accountability, while political elites place personal ambition above national interest. Cultural elites deride the very traditions that built the nation, echoing the arrogance of past societies that mocked their own heritage before falling into irrelevance. The refusal to confront debt, the erosion of civic trust, the neglect of borders, and the abandonment of shared history all recall familiar chapters of decline. Yet because most people assume America is too powerful to collapse, they ignore how quickly strength can vanish once rot takes hold. The value of studying these examples lies not in despair but in recognition. Rome, Athens, and Weimar Germany teach that decline is not inevitable. It can be slowed or reversed when citizens act decisively. Renewal requires honesty, sacrifice, and a willingness to learn from mistakes rather than repeat them. A republic that takes warning seriously can reform its institutions, revive its culture, and restore its balance. But if America dismisses history as irrelevant, it risks becoming just another chapter in the long record of once great powers that failed to heed the lessons written in their own ruins. Number 10. What comes next and what we must do? The future is not fixed, and decline is not destiny. America still possesses immense resources, creative energy, and a resilient people. Yet survival depends on whether citizens recognize the gravity of the moment. Ignoring debt, dismissing cultural decay, or tolerating political corruption only accelerates decline. Renewal begins with awareness, seeing the tremors before the earthquake, the warning signs before the collapse. If citizens refuse to confront reality, they will inherit a diminished republic, one incapable of defending liberty or projecting stability in a turbulent world. What must be done is neither easy nor comfortable. It requires leaders willing to speak truth rather than offer comforting illusions, and citizens willing to demand accountability. Fiscal restraint must replace reckless spending, merit must replace ideology and institutions, and civic education must reconnect Americans with their history. Securing borders, enforcing laws, and restoring equal justice are not partisan goals but existential necessities. Without these measures, sovereignty erodes, trust dissolves, and unity collapses. A republic survives only when its people are vigilant, disciplined, and committed to preserving what was handed down to them at great cost. The hour is late, but not yet past redemption. History shows that nations can recover when citizens reclaim virtue and courage. The United States can do the same if it abandons complacency and rediscovers the principles of responsibility, sacrifice, and shared identity. Renewal will not come from government decrees alone, but from families, communities, and individuals determined to restore meaning to civic life. The question is not whether challenges exist, they are already here, but whether Americans will rise to meet them. The choice is stark. Renewal or decline. The decision rests not with fate, but with the will of the people. America stands at a crossroads, and the choices made in the coming years will determine whether the republic renews itself or drifts toward decline. The signs are unmistakable: economic fragility, fractured communities, porous borders, weaponized institutions, and a culture at odds with its own history. These are not distant threats, but present realities shaping the lives of every citizen. History warns us that great powers rarely collapse from foreign invasion alone. They collapse when their own people lose the will to defend what they inherited. Yet decline is not inevitable. Renewal begins with awareness, honesty, and courage. It begins when citizens refuse complacency and demand accountability from leaders and themselves alike. The future is still unwritten, and the outcome depends on whether Americans rediscover the principles that once made the nation strong: discipline, sacrifice, and unity. If you believe these warnings matter, do not let the conversation end here. Share this message, spark discussions with friends and family, and stay engaged in the struggle to preserve America's future. Subscribe for more analysis, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join a community committed to truth and renewal. The challenges ahead are immense, but so too is the power of an awakened people.